Hello everyone, welcome to this tutorial on a tumbler transformation. So here I have a coffee tumbler from one of my coworkers. She graciously lent it to me when I offered to do a transformation for her. So it has, it's not really black paint, but maybe like a black coating of some sort from the manufacturer. I tried to get the rest of it off using acetone, basically treating it as if it were paint, and you'll see shortly that that didn't work. I guess I could have attempted to soak it in acetone like I do for other tumblers that I will strip down, but it was so thin, and I knew that I would be coating this with lots of other things, so I really wasn't too concerned. So a little bit of the black coloring came off, but not a whole lot. So I decided to sand it down and then just kind of start from scratch at that point. So I used an 80 grit sanding block. I'll do that off camera. I don't like to get the dust in my camera area. But there it is, all sanded the best I could, even the bottom. And then I cleaned it off with a 91% isopropyl alcohol. And I was just double checking how the lid fit. I wanted to decide if I needed to tape the top of the tumbler or not, but because of the way the lid fit, I decided not to tape off the top. So here I'm cleaning with the alcohol, and I will clean it at least twice. On the first pass, I can get off most of the dust and debris, and then on the second pass, I just make sure that it is perfectly clean. We want really good adhesion of the spray paint and ultimately the glitter and epoxy. So I hadn't worked with this particular size or style of tumbler before, but I have learned the hard way that it is better to use 2 foam inserts than 1 small insert, because you really want the tumbler to not come off of the wand while it's turning. Again, I have learned that the hard way, so I have 2 inserts in there. All right, I'm going to spray paint it with this Rust-Oleum 2x Ultra Cover. I ran out of my matte white, so this is, I think, semi-glossy. It really didn't matter to me. I just needed kind of a blank uniform slate. And I knew I wanted white because I knew I would be putting gold glitter down, and the gold paint and glitter stand out a lot more against a white background. So I'm a huge believer in using what you have. So I had this gold acrylic paint just kind of sitting off to the side, and I did not have a paintbrush on hand that I could find fast enough, and I thought to myself, again, this is just a base coat. It really doesn't matter. Let me just use my hand and get it as smooth as I could. I really wasn't even worried too much about streaks. I just wanted no giant white spots. I tend to be impatient, so I let it sit near a hairdryer for, I don't know, maybe 15 minutes or so, and it was dry. So I had this glitter, it's kind of like a glitter glue laying around, and I love it because it has gold flakes in it, basically like gold leaf mixed with some chunky glitters and fine glitters. I knew that this would not give opaque coverage, but because it is almost like a glue, I used that as my base, and then I sprinkled loose, chunky glitter, gold glitter over top of this. And you can't really tell, but it's a very small container of glitter. I honestly didn't have a whole lot of it, so I just kind of used it relatively sparingly, making sure that I get all parts of the tumbler covered. So it's not 100% covered, but that's because the gold flake glue stuff is underneath it with glitter in it anyway. As you can see, this is very spiky looking. So the chunky glitters were sticking straight up. So I just go in with my gloved hand and pat down the chunky glitter so it lays nice and flat. Because I know that the flatter I can get it now, the less sanding I'll have to do in the future. I haven't had a whole lot of luck with using wax paper or even parchment paper to flatten the chunky glitter, probably because I didn't do full coverage. In the past even, it would just stick to the paper. So gloved finger or hand it is. It's actually pretty fun to do. I do apologize for the teal-ish handle that keeps appearing in the front of the screen. I had another cup spinning at the time. So you just saw me pick out something. I had used this glitter for another project and had accidentally gotten some blue glitters mixed in. So I was kind of fishing those out because I am not after blue glitter for this project. So I knew I was after a peekaboo, which is where you put down your first layer, and really only parts of this are going to show through in the final product. So I knew that this did not have to be perfect. I knew I could hide any imperfections. Notice I did just run my finger around the top rim, making sure all the glitter pieces are down and not sticking out over the top. In the past, peekaboos have bothered me because I feel like you're wasting materials by completely coating a tumbler with gorgeous glitters and then covering up the majority of it. So I really, prior to starting this project, I really thought it through and I'm like, is there any way to get the same effect without wasting materials? And folks, I could not come up with a better way. With the peekaboo, you get depth, you get layers, you get dimension. This is 30 milliliters of, drumroll please, my new favorite epoxy resin. This is by Flynn Sisters, and it is their fast set epoxy. And guys, it is a game changer. This stuff is tacky enough for a second layer after about 2 hours and pretty much dry to the touch in 4 hours. Total game changer. I'm definitely spoiled now. It has UV protectant. It is nice and thick, and the bubbles, for the most part, release on their own. I still will give it a good torch, but I don't have to go crazy with it. So right now it's wintertime here in Maryland, and anytime I'm working in my garage with epoxy, A, I have a heater running in my garage, and B, I am wearing a respirator because this stuff is not good for you to breathe without one. But back to what I was saying earlier about the depth and dimension that a peekaboo gives. I really tried to think through, how can I get the peekaboo effect without wasting materials? Could I put down like a gold vinyl? But I could not come up with a better alternative. So in my opinion, this is worth it. So here is the tumbler after the first coat of epoxy. It's still wet. Even though I patted the glitter down the best I could, if you look closely, there are still some glitters that are, especially the gold flakes or gold leaf, that are sticking out. So I let the first layer of epoxy cure for at least 2 hours. Now again, remember this is the fast set and it really does depend on the temperature in your workspace. And then I put on a second coat of epoxy. So this is what it looks like after the second coat. And you can see that fewer of the gold flakes are sticking out. And I know at this point that after this layer cures, I'm going to need to sand it. So there is an 80 grit sanding block, and I will do that off camera. Here is a screenshot of my Cricut app on my phone, the Cricut Design Space. I'm using this smart vinyl to cut out with my Cricut Joy that I found used on Facebook Marketplace. I just love it. And I am cutting out my decals for the peekaboo. When you go to weed, I recommend putting your vinyl on your sticky mat, your grip mat, to help keep it flat. Now, because of this design, and because of the quality of the vinyl, it's very thick, sturdy stuff, I didn't need to weed. It was not tedious to weed. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. So I didn't need that fancy little thing I had on my fingers that catches all the weeded vinyl. Okay, so I have the drips. Again, this is for the peekaboo. So anywhere you put the decal, any part that you cover up with a decal right now will end up showing in the end. So because the top is curved, the drip, the top of the drip decal didn't line up perfectly with the top, as you can see, or you will see. And that's okay, because I know I can fix that later. So I will show you how to do that. And I have a subscription to the Cricut Design Space access thing. So it was really easy for me to find those drips. There are probably hundreds to choose from. I just found the one that stood out to me. And I ended up using the same pattern twice. And then the third one, I just reflected. I flipped it horizontally so that they weren't all completely identical. Okay, so for the hexagons, for the honeycomb, it's very important that you keep them together like that in a grouping, and that you not place them individually one by one, because if you do, you're going to lose the even spacing between the hexagons for the perfect honeycomb shape. One tip that I saw another Tumbler artist use was to put your peekaboo decal over top of any bumpy spots. Even after sanding, you're still going to have parts that might not be perfectly smooth. And so that's what I did. I found any spots that were still kind of lumpy and covered them up with the peekaboo decal, because once you spray paint and decorate and then remove the decal and then eventually put another coat of epoxy or two over top, you will never know that the bump was there to begin with. So just make sure you are really smoothing down all of the edges of the decal. You want to prevent the spray paint from seeping underneath. So just make your life a little easier in the end. I needed to make sure that I left enough room for her logo. So that big empty space in the middle is for her logo. I wanted to make sure that when you look at the tumbler, you could see some of the honeycomb and some of the drip and the logo kind of all in one, from one angle. Otherwise, I just did a nice kind of scattering of groups of 2, 3, or 4 hexagons. So again, it is important to use transfer tape with the honeycomb portion because you really want to keep that uniformity. And then I put a group of 3 on the bottom. So what you didn't see me do was I took that same exact white spray paint that I used earlier and I spray painted the whole thing right over top of all the decals. And I let that dry. Didn't take too long. I put a hair dryer on it for maybe, I don't know, 15 minutes. So now I am taking alcohol ink and I'm starting with my lightest color. So I showed you up close, I think that was called lemon. And I just want to get a good coating. So when I was talking to my colleague, whose Tumbler I am redoing, I asked, this is mango. I asked her if she wanted like a mostly white base or a mostly yellow base, and she said mostly yellow. So if you've been doing this type of art, whether on a tumbler or canvas, for any length of time, you know that a solid color is really difficult because with a solid color, it is hard to hide imperfections. Plus, this look with the alcohol ink, I just think is beautiful. It looks like honey. It's bright. So I started with the lightest color, lemon. Then I did the mango, which is like a yellowish orange. And then now I'm using ginger, which is really like a kind of a deep yellow, almost brown, but it really, I do not consider it a brown. So the sponge that I'm using is actually a cut up magic eraser. I did not have any makeup sponges, so this is a great alternative because I just toss them after I'm done with the project. I'm pretty bad about cleaning reusable sponges and paintbrushes and things, but you can use almost anything you have to apply and blend the alcohol inks. But we had some extra magic erasers and I saw someone else using one time and I thought, how clever. So what I'm doing is I had plain clear alcohol in that little medicine cup and I just dunked the sponge into it and then I wrung it out. I squeezed out the excess and then now I'm just going around the whole cup and kind of dabbing and blending a little bit more. The key is not to let any of the alcohol ink run. You don't want streaks. You want blotting, you want blending. So I let this sit for about an hour or so. I had the blow dryer on it for a little bit of that time, just because, like I said, I can be impatient. But it's probably best to weed the peekaboo decals off before it completely dries. So if you can help it, do this on the same day. If you do it the next day, it probably will be fine. But as you are weeding, first of all, it's very helpful to have some kind of like picker type tool. So I'm using the, it's not the Cricut brand. I think it's the Dollar Tree brand of a vinyl picker. But as you're doing it, you want to go toward the center of the decal because just in case you over scrape, you'll avoid scraping the design, the design that you want to show. I was very impressed with how easily these came off. I barely had to do any follow-up. But I liked having this on my turner. I guess I could have taken it off of the turner and set it on my cool pool noodle stand that you saw earlier. But I like this because I can just turn it just like that. And I'm just double checking that I didn't miss anything, because generally you can tell where the stickers are or where the decals are, even underneath the paint or the alcohol ink and the spray paint. So getting the parts off of the bottom, and we're almost done with the weeding. So I did let this sit and dry completely overnight. Oh, one other thing. Remember those parts of the drips at the top where the decal didn't quite match the top of the cup because of the curve? So I have some acetone on a Q-tip, and I make sure that it is not going to run. So I scraped off the Q-tip on the side of the cup, and I'm just gently rubbing the Q-tip with acetone on it onto the parts of the paint that I want to remove. Very easy. The biggest thing to remember is to not have your Q-tip so saturated that the acetone drips, because if it does, it's not the end of the world, but it will ruin that portion of your design. So anywhere you have spray paint and or alcohol ink that you want to clean up, this will take care of it for you. Really easy. If your acetone does accidentally drip, or you get it in a place that you didn't mean to, you can just take a sponge and you can redo that section of the tumbler with the alcohol ink. Or if it's a really small spot that you want to add some ink back to, you can just use a Q-tip. I wouldn't recommend a Q-tip for applying alcohol ink normally, but if it's just a tiny little touch-up spot, you can absolutely put a drop or two of the alcohol ink on the Q-tip and then use the Q-tip to apply that sort of patchwork. So here it is, beautifully weeded and cleaned. There's the bottom. And I do let this completely dry overnight. I didn't want to risk ruining my alcohol ink pattern by applying epoxy too soon. I do not like to seal my alcohol ink work before epoxying. I have learned the hard way that a spray sealer can completely ruin an alcohol ink design. Different people do it different ways. I just prefer to let the alcohol ink dry overnight, and I then put epoxy over top the next day, and I had zero running, zero problems. I think I found a hair in there, so I used tweezers to pick that out. But this again is the Flynn Sisters Quick Coat, using a torch to pop the bubbles, making sure it is nice and smooth. This is sped way up. This is probably like 5 times as fast. And I'm also making sure that the epoxy is not really pooling in any one area, making sure it's flat. Cover it with a net and let it go. Okay, so I let that cure overnight. And now I am taking a lint-free pad and cleaning the area of the cup that I would like to put my decal. So this is actually an offset on white vinyl, the same white vinyl that I used for the peekaboo, for my coworker's logo. So I'm putting down this white offset on vinyl. And I'm not going to end up removing it. I'm going to just put it down and it will end up being permanent, because I'm about to put a clear water slide with her printed decal on it over top of this white offset. And if I didn't have this white background, the logo would not pop. It would not stand out. So this is more of, I keep calling it an offset. It's like an enlarged version, if you will, of her logo. And so I printed her logo in reverse, and I sprayed it with that clear spray 3 times and let it dry, not too long, like maybe 20 minutes. And then what I'm doing is taking my scissors and I'm cutting as close as I can to the logo. And I'm also almost purposefully making wiggly curves, like not straight lines with the scissors, because I really want this to blend into the cup. Now, it looks like it's got a white background, but that is going to slide off as I follow the process. So you need like room temperature water, and you let the water slide paper sit in the water for about a minute or so. And it feels kind of like a temporary tattoo. Have you ever put one of those on before? And you can print on water slides without mirroring the image, but I've watched a couple of tutorials and I have found that I do like the idea of mirroring the image, because it is a little bit easier to lay down the water slide decal. So I took a damp paper towel and I just kind of blotted that white vinyl. And here's the magic, folks. This is why it's called a water slide. So I just tried to line it up the best that I could, knowing that I did have a little bit of wiggle room. But if I didn't have that white vinyl in the background, especially the yellow parts of her logo would be completely lost, because the water slide itself is clear. The water slide paper can be manipulated, but it's important to keep it wet so that it doesn't tear, and that you're not too forceful with it, because again, it will tear. And I actually ended up tearing that bee that's right there. I just started fiddling too much with it, and I did tear it off by accident, but I was able to fix it. It's pretty forgiving. Once you have it where you want it, you just blot it dry. Right here, I think, is where I tear it off by accident. You blot it dry, and then you just let it dry. And I let this dry overnight once I was happy with it. I will still be adding more bees around the cup. I was super fiddly with this. I really wanted it to be in the right position, and I can tend to get fixated on things like that sometimes. It ended up not being perfect. I did have to let go of perfection. Oh, and there goes the bee. So I did end up getting it back into place. Tap it with a little bit of water. Blotting it off carefully. And then I'm like, leave it alone. Don't touch it anymore. So I wasn't sure if I wanted the other bees on the cup to be the same size as the bee in the logo, or if I wanted it to be a little bit bigger, just to stand out a little bit more. And so you'll see me shortly. I ended up having both ready to go, and I cut out one of each, and then I just tested them out. So to get the logo onto a water slide, I imported the logo image into my Cricut Design Space software. And here's where I'm testing. Do I want the larger bee or the smaller bee? And ultimately I decide on the larger bee. But when you upload a decal image into Cricut Design Space, it'll ask you if you want to remove the background. And I did that because I wanted to remove the white background of the logo and just have everything kind of in the forefront. So I did the offset white vinyl for my backgrounds for the bees because, again, if I just put the bee directly on the cup, it would get lost. There are other ways, by the way, to have a white background with a clear water slide. You can have a white water slide, but then, I don't know, I really liked this method the best. I did a lot of YouTube tutorial watching prior to doing this cup, so this is the way I chose to do it, and I'm very happy with it. So just cleaning up any little drips of water as I go. But I was also going to say with the individual bees, I just took a kind of a screenshot of just the bee and I enlarged it. And then a few of the bees are facing one direction, and then a few of the other bees are facing the other direction. I just did a horizontal flip in the design space. All right, so I let that dry overnight, and then prior to putting on this coat of the Flynn Sisters Fast Set Epoxy, which I was just mixing, I just take a really old craft knife and I run it around the rim to get off any excess epoxy. I, with a 220 grit sanding block, sanded a few of the parts, certainly not over the water slide decal, because that is not sealed whatsoever. And then I always take a coffee filter with isopropyl alcohol and clean off the tumbler. The coffee filter is lint-free, so there's no worry of getting any little particles on the cup. And then you saw a blow dryer. That was kind of twofold. One, to get any potential fuzzies off, but two, to warm up the cup a little bit because it is cold in my garage. Even though I have a heater running, it's still on the colder side. And then I'm just putting on this coat of epoxy, making sure every little area is covered all the way up to the top. Sometimes I have a tendency to put on too much epoxy. So in a little bit, you'll see me hit this with the heat gun to start to pop any air bubbles. And then I will hit it with the torch. So if I were to hit it with the torch right now, because it's so cold in my garage, the heat from the torch would not get all the way down to the bottom layer of the wet epoxy. So I like to heat it with my heat gun first and then torch it. Certainly do not over torch because you will burn your epoxy. But because I like to put a really thick layer on, I had to make sure that the bottom, it wasn't pooling on the bottom. Okay, so then this is the next day, and I'm taking a brand new craft blade, and running it along the top and inside of the cup rim to get any excess epoxy off. And I'm just doing this very carefully. Always cut away from yourself. These knives or blades really are extremely sharp, and I've certainly made mistakes in the past. So this is a 220 grit sanding block, and I'm just going over the areas that I just used the blade on to get any extra little bits off. So now I'm just taking a piece of paper towel with some acetone and cleaning out the inside of that rim really good, just to get all the dust and extra glitter and spray paint, getting all those crevices nice and squeaky clean. So then I'm just cleaning the inside of the cup with some dish soap and warm water, scrubbing that nice and clean, clean the lid, and voila! It fits on beautifully, and it is all done. So happy with it. Here it is out in the natural sunlight. I hope she loves it. There's the cute little bottom. And just as I was filming this morning, up in the sky, so this was a lot of fun to make. I learned a lot. I hope you did too. And thank you so much for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.